Okay, my dudes, listen up. We got a game plan. In this video, I'm going to try to keep it short. I am going to try to convince you to trade for these 3 wide receivers that I think are currently way too undervalued in Dynasty Fantasy Football. The 2 guys we have at the beginning are going to be younger assets that I think you can trade for a rebuilding or a contending team. And the last guy we have is going to be for pure contenders. Maybe if you're a rebuilder and you want to get sneaky and your league trades a lot, you can trade for him and try to sell him for a little bit more once we get to October. But of course, before we get into it, please go down there, drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment letting me know a wide receiver that you have recently traded for, and I'd be happy to figure out what that price point is. And I think that should be it. Let's just go into it. Let's start it off with our first guy. And dear God, we've come a long way because over the past 2 off seasons, I've said, you know what? Look at the situation. This is the worst spot to be in football. You have serious target competition. You have some of the worst quarterback play in the entire NFL. What would I ever have to do to go out of my way to trade for Jeudy? Why would I ever do such a thing? Well, now, ladies and gentlemen, I do not know why, but if you head over to Keep Trade Cut right now, Jeudy has fallen 14 spots. Now, I understand there is some off the field concerns with legal trade. It looks like that's completely gone. It looks like that's not something you really have to worry about from a Dynasty Fantasy Football perspective. And with Jeudy, I just want to talk about this 2021 season because obviously right now, the Denver Broncos are probably the league favorite to be the comeback offense of the year, to go from absolutely nothing in 2021, nothing in 2020. The last time this team had a respectable offense was back when Peyton Manning was breaking records. And now they go out there, they trade pretty much every asset they can, every asset that they have on the books. They go get Russell Wilson, who is an unbelievable upgrade over Teddy Bridgewater. Nobody's going to argue against that. And now we have to dive into this situation. We have to find where the value lies. And before we talk about this 2021 season, actually, let me first address something. Jeudy's 23 years old. Jeudy just turned 23. Every single snap, even if this team makes it to the Super Bowl, every single snap that he will play this upcoming season, he will be 23 years old. Now, some players that are older than Jeudy for your Dynasty League, just to give you context, because this is someone that's going to continue to improve. This is not someone that is already capped out. He's already hit his prime. No, he is still developing. Players that are older than Jeudy: Najee Harris, Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle from last year's draft class. And in this year's draft class, you have other players that are currently older than Jeudy. Kenny Pickett is older than Jeudy right now. This is a player that will continue to improve. This is a player that will continue to develop. However, I think he's good enough as is. I think he's good enough as his last year, to be honest, because if we go back to the worst situation in football where you're competing for targets with Courtland Sutton, you're competing for targets with Tim Patrick, you're competing for targets with Noah Fant, with Albert O, with Javonte Williams, with Melvin Gordon, and you have Teddy Bridgewater holding back this entire offense. So the target competition is through the roof, and you have nobody to elevate the overall floor of this offense for really anybody to provide value. We saw Jeudy come in and be the number 1 receiver in this offense. I'm going to continue to talk about this because, in my opinion, the worst mistake people are making right now is assuming that this is a team that Courtland Sutton has a chance to be the wide receiver 1. Now, maybe it's a chance just the way probabilities work, but people are baking in the chance as like 40 to 45%. I think it's a lot closer to like 10%. I think it's very low. And if we go into this, yeah, you take a step back, you say, okay, well, I mean, Jeudy averaged 5.6 targets a game. Courtland Sutton was at 5.7. Jeudy, 46.5 receiving yards a game. Courtland Sutton was at 56. Jeudy, 8.3 yards per target. Courtland Sutton, 7.9. They look like they are identical. They look like they are co-wide receiver 1A and wide receiver 1B in Denver. Well, I'll take a step back. And remember, Jeudy's younger than Kenny Pickett. He is extremely young. He's going to continue to develop. Whereas Courtland Sutton is going to turn 27 this upcoming season. Courtland Sutton's older than Chris Godwin. Like, Courtland Sutton, he's done developing. He's already peaked out. It's not like Courtland Sutton's getting better at the game of football. Okay? So let's just say if these statistics just stood by themselves and didn't need context, we would still project, just based off of age alone, career development, we would assume that Jerry Jeudy continues to improve and he would be the wide receiver one regardless. But I know a lot of people have already heard me talk about this. We need to dive deeper. We need to look at when both wide receivers were on the field, because Jerry Jeudy last year, he played week 1, then he got injured. Then afterwards, he came back week 8 and played through the rest of the season. So you had 10 games with Jerry Jeudy playing and 7 games without Jerry Jeudy. So Courtland Sutton got the benefit of being that wide receiver one in this offense, of not having the target competition of Jerry Jeudy. And if we look at that 10-game sample where Jerry Jeudy played, you had Jerry Jeudy. Of course, his statistics remain the same. He had 3.8 receptions per game. He had 46.7 yards a game. That doesn't change whatsoever. But Courtland Sutton comes down to 1.8 receptions per game and to 18.6 receiving yards. That's not half. That's less than half of what Jerry Jeudy gave you. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, okay, well, Mason, you fool. Oh my God. Have you not heard? Have you not heard the rumors? DK Metcalf was big. Courtland Sutton is big. Courtland Sutton had a high average depth of target. Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, they had a high average depth of target. Courtland Sutton's a way better fit with Russell Wilson. Are we sure about that? Or are you repeating something else that someone has said? Or are we just looking at Courtland Sutton as a big-bodied wide receiver and saying, oh, hell, it kind of looks like DK Metcalf? And if we're talking average depth of target on the extremes is not something that's predictive for fantasy football success. Honestly, if you're at the extremes, I don't really want you in fantasy football unless it's best ball. If it's best ball, sure, go get Courtland Sutton. But if you have that incredibly high average depth of target, what you are going to find is you are utilized as the field stretching receiver in your offense. You are on the field and probably good at providing efficiency for your offense without necessarily providing a lot of fantasy value. If we go through and if we look at the top 12 wide receivers from an average depth of target perspective, you have Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Courtland Sutton, Emmanuel Sanders, Tyler Lockett. Oh, there's Lockett. That's why everyone's excited. Nelson Aguilar, Devonta Smith, Bryan Edwards, Zay Jones, Kenny Golladay, Keelan Cole, Van Jefferson. Average depth of target's not predictive of fantasy football success. It's predictive of volatility, which will be good for best ball and good for spike weeks, but that's not necessarily what we're looking for in Dynasty. So I don't really find any value in the argument that because Courtland Sutton had the higher average depth of target, he will be a more natural fit with Russell Wilson. I think the player that was able to command more volume, the player that was able to be more efficient with his volume, is the guy I want in the offense. Not to mention, he's 5 years younger at the time. It was 4 years younger, whatever the hell it is. And what is the most glaring point that you should go trade for Jerry Jeudy right now is, as we've said, he's younger than rookies in this class, and he cost less in Dynasty than he does in redraft leagues. If you head over to Underdog Fantasy, the best place to draft your teams this season, the best place to ever draft your teams, go sign up for Underdog Fantasy. Have some fun in your life. When you sign up Underdog Fantasy with promo code FLOCK, they will match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. You'll get all my Dynasty rankings, all my rookie rankings, my rookie draft guide, and you'll support this channel. Get in a draft with me, get in the draft with your friends, get in the draft in the public lobby. Start drafting, have some fun, promo code FLOCK. Find the link in the description. But if we head over there, Jerry Jeudy right now is being drafted as the wide receiver 23. Compare this to Keep Trade Cut, who has him at the wide receiver 27. I think the people that are going out of their way and putting money up for these drafts and drafting at high volume, like with $10 million in the prize pool, I think that's something we can use. I think that's something we can look at. So if you're projecting this Denver Broncos offense to take a significant leap forward, and we can get a player in Dynasty that is younger than some rookies in this draft class at a cheaper cost in Dynasty than he's going in redraft, sign me up. Go trade for Jerry Jeudy in every spot possible. I can't imagine I'm saying this. People who have been watching the channel for years now are probably laughing. They're probably, I feel like a fraud now that we're Jerry Jeudy stands, but it is what it is. And someone else I feel like I'm a fraud with. A player that has had a fantastic offseason. The offseason could not have been better for him. However, his dynasty value has not changed in the slightest. If you go over and you look at keep trade cut, right now, Darnell Mooney is still the wide receiver 33. And before you say it, you know you are talking to the world's #1 Justin Fields hater. You know how this week I've been getting so much hate for coming out talking about Zach Wilson not being a good quarterback. Oh, you should have seen the comment section last year when we were going into Justin Fields. People were taking him in the second round of startup drafts. Like, I get it. Fields isn't good. However, A, he could improve, which is still in the range of outcomes. I'm not necessarily saying it's very likely, but it's still possible. And B, it just might not matter to begin with, because it looks like Darnell Mooney is on that Terry McLaurin trajectory. It looks like Darnell Mooney is going to be such a target hog in this Chicago Bears offense that even though this should be one of the worst offenses in the NFL, he is going to be getting peppered with targets. And you know, we just got done comparing two wide receivers that I don't necessarily think people are valuing correctly with Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton. Let's go over and let's look at Darnell Mooney compared to Allen Robinson this past year. And I will admit, there are strong arguments to be made that Allen Robinson was playing under the franchise tag and he was saying, you know what? F this. Fields is bad. This situation sucks. I don't want to be here. I'm not trying. Now, I think it's probably a weak argument to be made, to be honest, because any player that fails, you can go out there and make that same argument. I don't necessarily like it, but maybe there's something to it. Maybe there's something to it with this Allen Robinson argument. So I will put that out there because I know a lot of people have said that before. But Darnell Mooney last season, almost 8.5 targets a game, 4.8 receptions a game, and 62 receiving yards per game. Allen Robinson, on the other hand, 5.5 targets per game, 3.2 receptions per game, and 34 receiving yards per game. Thomas, please throw those up side by side. Darnell Mooney took over as the clear alpha wide receiver 1 in this offense in his second season. I'm of the opinion that Allen Robinson does have talent. I was drafting Allen Robinson like an idiot in the third round of redrafts last year. Like, trust me, I've been in on Allen Robinson. I started playing Dynasty in 2014. That was his draft class. All those guys, Allen Robinson, Mike Evans, Sammy Watkins, Brandon Cooks, these players I'm irrationally high on. Like Odell Beckham Jr., throw him on that list. He's the intro of this channel. I love me some A-Rob, but to see Darnell Mooney come out and dominate him from an efficiency standpoint and a volume standpoint, that's massive. And if we go into this and we look at the target share last season, y'all know we pulled up the average depth of target for receivers next to Courtland Sutton, realize, oh, hell, average depth of target's not that predictive of fantasy football success. It's predictive of volatility, good in best ball, yada, yada, not good in fantasy football. Whereas what is extremely predictive for fantasy football success is going to be target share in your offense. And if we look at the top 12 wide receivers with their target share on a per game basis last season, no surprise, Cooper Kupp 1, Devontae Adams 2, Justin Jefferson 3, DJ Moore 4, Deontay Johnson, DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, then Darnell Mooney. Darnell Mooney, he may stick out like a sore thumb. Obviously, he's not half the talent that AJ Brown is, but he cost 10% of the price. Then you got Brandon Cooks, Stephon Diggs, Calvin Ridley, and Hollywood Brown. Now, you're looking at Allen Robinson leave this offense. They replace Allen Robinson with Byron Pringle. It's a pretty good spot to be in. I mean, yes, they bring in, I don't even know if I can pronounce this name correctly, Velus Jones Jr. Like, this is a wide receiver that is almost as old as Juju Smith-Schuster. This is a wide receiver that was not even on the radar. The only reason he got drafted in the second round was because of speed, because he can have a high average at the target and possibly take defensive attention away from the players that will be getting targeted like Darnell Mooney. And now I know that everybody's going to be coming out and saying the same thing. Okay, well, Mason, the Chicago Bears offense is just simply not going to have enough passing volume to go around. We have to fade everybody here. I agree with you. This Chicago Bears offense is most likely going to be very, very bad. But if you look at this team last season, it already was very, very bad, and Darnell Mooney dominated in that situation. The only teams that had less passing yards last season than the Bears, the Texans, the Browns, the Colts, the Eagles, the Panthers, the Giants, and the Saints. So I agree with you. This situation in Chicago, in terms of the quarterback play and the overall passing volume, is bad, but we've already seen Darnell Mooney produce in that bad situation, and he's young. And going back to what we were talking about, go draft on Underdog Fantasy, use promo code FLOCK and pull it up there. And you're seeing him being drafted as the wide receiver 31. Now we head over to Keep Trade Cut to figure out where the Dynasty community is valuing him. He's being valued as the wide receiver 33 with Keep Trade Cut. Another young wide receiver that is cheaper in Dynasty than in redraft. I'm going out and getting him. Maybe I'm not drafting him a lot for just this season in particular. I know they can bring in target competition next year. I just don't necessarily see how you buy into Darnell Mooney. He's not going to cost you a 2023 first. Say you go out there and you trade an early second for him this year. You go trade like George Pickens for Darnell Mooney. You go trade Jahan Dotson for Darnell Mooney. It's hard to look back at that 12 months from now and go, okay, oh my God, we made a massive mistake. How did I trade George Pickens for Darnell Mooney? I don't think you're going to be in that scenario. I think you're going to be just fine. Now let's go over to a wide receiver that, yes, of course, is going to be drafted higher on Underdog than Keep Trade Cut. This is where it makes sense. Keenan Allen, currently 30 years old. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 12 on Underdog Fantasy, the wide receiver 35 on Keep Trade Cut. So, of course, we can't say, oh, he's being drafted here on Underdog Fantasy. That means he's undervalued in Dynasty, because he should have a lower value in Dynasty. He's only valuable to contending rosters. But what I want to talk about is the consistency you are getting with Keenan Allen. This is hilarious to bring up, but over the past 5 seasons, here are the finishes for Keenan Allen on a points per game basis in a PPR format. Wide receiver 11, wide receiver 7, wide receiver 8, wide receiver 12, wide receiver 3. Over the past 5 seasons, Keenan Allen has been a wide receiver 1 every single year. Now, of course, 30 years old, you have to be concerned that the drop-off is coming soon. That's why he's being drafted as the wide receiver 12, is being drafted as his floor over the past 5 seasons in redraft. However, on Underdog, there's so much room to profit. Like, if we're just going through this list right now and we're looking at veteran players that are currently being valued over Keenan Allen is being valued behind Mike Williams. He's being valued behind Courtland Sutton. Courtland Sutton's turning 27, and Sutton's best season ever. I believe he was the wide receiver 25 on a per game basis, aka a low-end wide receiver 3. His best season ever. His best season on record. Amari Cooper. Yes, a little bit younger, but we don't even know if he's going to be on the Browns next year. Amari Cooper, valued higher than Keenan Allen. Of course, you have some rookies. I mean, if you're a rebuilding roster, sure. If you want to go out there and get Sky Moore, if you want to go get Rashad Bateman, I'm fine with it. But you have Mike Williams going rounds ahead of Keenan Allen, according to Keep Trade Cut and startups. I mean, I probably prefer Mike Evans. I definitely prefer Mike Evans. I will be on record saying that. But I don't necessarily think it's that far. So if you're able to somehow, some way, go trade Amari Cooper, like right now, Amari Cooper, according to Keep Trade Cut, is going around ahead of Keenan Allen. I would go and I would trade Amari Cooper in a 2nd round pick to get to Keenan Allen. Let's talk about the fact that this is a wide receiver that if we ever want to assume someone will age gracefully in the NFL, that someone will be Larry Fitzgerald. Is it not a safe assumption for a wide receiver that doesn't win with athleticism and instead a wide receiver that purely wins with technique? Is it not a safe bet to take that guy? Like, if you're asking me, Mason, who do you think scores more points when they're 32 years old? Keenan Allen or Tyreek Hill? Tyreek Hill, who wins with athleticism? Tyreek Hill, who wins because he's the fastest player in the field? Or Keenan Allen, who wins because he can generate separation on a slant route and he can go out there and run for an extra 5 yards and fall down? I'm going with that guy, especially when he's attached to a young franchise quarterback. So I hope that this video is able to help you. I honestly think that these guys are severely undervalued right now on Keep Trade Cut. So, of course, go out there, trade for them in Dynasty. If we're talking about their redraft ADP, like if you're an Underdog league, I don't want to necessarily say, oh, they're great targets in Underdog drafts. I think they are appropriately priced in that format, but we're on the Dynasty channel. We're talking Dynasty trade targets. That's where I'm going to be going out and trying to acquire these guys at a good value. But of course, thank you so much for being a part of the flock, supporting the channel. I appreciate you. I hope you go down there, drop a like. Hope you leave a comment, and I hope that you have a great day.